Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
So now we come to the relationship between earlier ideas, that is humanist thinkers, universities, and the Italian thinkers. So how this relationship between earliest ideas and how when the humanists think of the earlier times, how they kind of revisit those times and make sense of those times. So there was Italian thinkers whom we now look at is first is Dante. He was a great Italian scholar who showed early signs of humanistic inclinations in his use of Italian language and his love of classical literature. So Dante is an important scholar who for the first time takes interest in studying the culture of people. But humanism got way in Italy largely through the influence of another great scholar named Petrarch. So other than Dante, another important scholar who takes interest in the study of humanities is Petrarch. This old master was anxious that Italy should be purged of barbaric taint. So this Petrarch was very curious and very interested in bringing out Italy from the medieval thinking, or he calls it barbaric taint. Barbaric is very old ways of thinking, and to renew or to have a rebirth of the classical tradition. And he was interested not only in revival of classical Latin, but was also an original thinker. So this Petrarch is not just simply going back to the classical traditions and bringing it forth, but he was an original thinker. And he was the founder of school of thinkers who built new ideals of life. So in Italy, he was one of the founders of the school of thinking, which built new ideals of life. So now we see the connections between universities and humanism. We already saw thinkers like Dante and Petrarch who are giving importance to this phenomena of humanities in their writing and is bringing the individuals back to the forefront. And when it comes to universities and humanism, we see that before the end of the 14th century, Manuel Chryslores, a Greek scholar, taught this to Italian students at the University of Padua. So another important learning space which gets established in Italy during this period is University of Padua. So the scholar here, Manuel Chryslores, had began teaching his students about the importance of humanities. And Manuel also taught at Pavia, Milan, Venice, and Rome. Along with this teaching in Padua, he had also taught in other places or other cities in Italy like Pavia, Milan, Venice, and Rome. Alongside the passion for Greek learning, there developed a movement for the revival of Latin scholarship. So it is not only the Greek traditions which these people are going back to, but alongside there developed a movement for revival of Latin scholarship. So the study of Latin is also given a lot of importance at this period. A number of eminent writers attempted to write correct Latin style on various subjects. So at this period, a number of writers are trying to write correct Latin style and study this new language, that is Latin. A new school of philosophy known as Neoplatonists emerged in Italy, which took pride in coming in touch with wisdom and refined intelligence of the Greek philosophers. So a new set of scholars are emerging in Italy during the 14th century who are called Neoplatonists. So the name itself suggests it meant new followers of the great Greek philosopher Plato. So we are aware of the great philosophers of the Greek civilization, which included Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. They three were the main philosophers or the great philosophers of the ancient Greece. And in Italy, during the 14th century, there emerged a set of scholars who call themselves new followers of Plato, and they take great pride in going back to the literature of the ancient Greece and the philosophies of ancient Greece. And the revival of Greek and Latin scholarship inspired a new idea to reconstruct life on a new model and to appreciate the value of pre-Christian system of thought. So when they go back to the ancient Greek civilization, people are encouraged to know more about this rich civilization and reconstruct their own lives on this basis. So it is not just learning what happened in the past, but they are comparing their lives with those ancient past and trying to reshape one's own life in a better way. And as a result, it appreciated the value of pre-Christian system of thought. So this is a period before Europe had converted into Christianity. So it's in the under the Constantinople emperor that Europe takes up Christianity as its official religion. Before that, Europe did not have Christianity as the major religion, and in the Greek period, it was not Christianity which the people believed in or followed. So now when they are going back to the ancient civilization and learning about its literature and philosophy, people understand the value of pre-Christian period and the system of thought. That is a period before Christianity had emerged as the state religion. And the humanist movement became so popular that even the Pope of this time recognized that Greek learning was useful for the Christians. So instead of opposing it, Pope, who's the head of Catholic Church, also in certain ways had to support this humanist movement, because the humanist movement was getting a lot of support and a lot of people was getting involved in the study of the ancient civilization, and it had become so strong and powerful that it was not possible for the church and its head to oppose this movement. So they had to accept that this Greek civilization was rich and it had to be studied. So thus the church, instead of opposing the revival of Greek learning, which was bound to weaken the ideas and beliefs of the church authority, became its great ally. Ally means friend or supporter. So church, even when they clearly knew that if people go back to the pre-Christian life and get to know more about its special features and importance, it would harm the church and its beliefs. But still, the church or the authority of the church could not oppose or stop the people from taking interest in the ancient or the classical learning. And many Italian scholars began to study the original Greek text of the New Testament, discovering and correcting the mistakes in the Latin Bible of the Middle Ages. So, as a result, when people started having knowledge of Greek language, they went back to the New Testament, which was written in the Greek language, and it helped them correct the Latin Bible, that is the Bible written in Latin in the medieval period. So this Bible, which was written in the Greek language, helped the people counter check and see what all mistakes was there in the Latin Bible written at a later period. And one of them, Pico della Mirandola, set himself to the task of translating the whole of Bible into Italian. So another scholar whose name was Pico della Mirandola is credited with the task of translating Bible into the language, Italian language. But the main efforts of the scholars were directed towards the revival of secular learning and literature by recapturing the spirit of Romans and Greeks. And the main effort was to redirect the revival of secular learning and literature. Secular means non-religious. Something which is outside of religion is referred to as secular. And the effort was to recapture the spirit of Romans and Greeks, which will then help the people in the medieval Europe to reshape their life and begin a new phase of life, or to lay the foundations of a modern society. So the Patriarch's Tales and the Boccaccio's Decameron were written and designed to please and amuse the cultured public which had grown up in the rich background of Italian city life. So Patriarch, the very important scholar whose work the Tales and Boccaccio's Decameron were written and designed to make people think and question and be critical of their times and redefine their times and rediscover themselves in this process. The men who were imbued with the spirit of new learning, that is, men who were encouraged to take up this new learning, were very often formed their own groups for carrying their studies further. So these men mostly did not do it alone, but formed a group of people with similar interests to take forward these studies. Such studies first appeared at Florence, that is one of the Italian cities, and the chief center of humanism. So Florence emerged as the chief center of humanism during the 14th century, because several groups of people who were interested in the classical traditions came together and took interest or initiated the study of ancient classical texts here. And the Cosmo de' Medici founded the Platonic Academy in 1438. So this is another important family who is taking importance in founding the Platonic Academy, an academy named after the great philosopher Plato, in the city of Florence. And this institution made great progress under the administration of Lorenzo de' Medici. So this institution became very important under the administration of Lorenzo de' Medici, and men of genius were attracted to his court, who discussed philosophy, literature, art in the palace at Florence. So people who were this was a very elite family in Florence, and many people came together in their palace to discuss philosophy, literature, and art. The Platonic Academy not only popularized the ideas of the great thinker, but also developed the admiration of Plato into a cult which started some ceremonial observance. So a people who were called Neoplatonists and who were interested in the study of works written by Plato came together and formed into a cult, or a section of people who were strong followers of Plato. Another academy was founded at Rome in about 1460 to encourage the study of Latin antiquities and cultivate love for the ancient glories of Rome. So alongside the study of ancient Greece, an effort is being taken to study Latin, the ancient language of Rome, and to know its culture. So here we have some more questions from the topics which we have covered till now. So this includes: describe the features of humanism. So the literary and intellectual aspects of Renaissance movement are called humanism. We have already seen it. The intellectual and the literary aspects are called humanism, and the promoters were known as humanists. Because of their interest in the studies of classics or the human letters, in opposition to divine letters, that is theology. They were called humanists because of their interest they took in learning more about human letters than the divine letters, and give the ideas of the scholar Petrarch. So humanism got way in Italy largely through the influence of great scholar named Petrarch. His influence and his contribution was very great to the spread of humanism in Italy. And he was interested not only in revival of classical Latin, but also was an original thinker. And he was the founder of school of thinkers who built new ideals of life. So this became his contributions to the spread of humanism in Italy. So now we come to the political ideas. What's happening in this sphere? So it was inevitable that the new spirit of inquiry should spread beyond the realm of purely classical and literary activity. So it is inevitable or non-stoppable, or it cannot be stopped, that people will just confine their critical spirit to study of earlier literature. But it is sure and it is obvious that it will come out, and people will start thinking about all other institutes in a critical way and start questioning it. In the 13th century, Dante, an important scholar, had pointed a way of revival of political thought by his treatise in favor of imperial authority, De Monarchia. So Dante had written a political treatise or a theory on the politics by pointing out that there was a need of a strong imperial authority or a strong ruler, and this work was called De Monarchia. And the art of government had been favorite study among the ancient Greeks. So the art of government, or how a governing body should be, was always a favorite topic of the Greek philosophers, and renewed interest in writings of Plato and Aristotle, which naturally led to a fresh examination of the political and social conditions of the day. Because great philosophers like Plato, Aristotle were always concerned about the political setup and the administrative setup of their society, people who went back to their writings also somehow started taking more importance or giving more importance to the political structure of their times. So we come to another important scholar who lived in the Renaissance Europe, that is Machiavelli. So the most famous of the political thinkers of the Renaissance was Niccolo Machiavelli. So he is one of the political thinkers during the Renaissance. And he served for 15 years as a secretary to the Florentine government and passed his whole life in confused background of petty Italian politics. So he spent a lot of time thinking about the Italian politics, and he was almost for 14 years a secretary to the Florentine government, to the government of Florence. And he also studied Latin and Greek thought and ancient history. So he was also interested in the classical traditions and studied ancient Latin and Greek languages. And his celebrated work is The Prince, which is a work of Italian Renaissance. So the work he has written on the political structure and how the political administrative structure should be is titled The Prince. It is one of the very well-known works written during the Renaissance period, and he is credited with this book, which gives importance to the political thought and the administrative arrangements. Machiavelli resembles the other humanists in his dislike of church and his yearning to live imaginatively in the world of ancients. So, what resemblance or similarity he has with the other humanist scholars is his dislike of church. He also questioned the authority of church over men, and he yearned or he desired to live a life to the full in this world, not the other world. The Prince was a secular treatise on politics. Secular, as I've already said, is a non-religious, which do not take into consideration the religious aspects. So his work, The Prince, was a secular treatise on politics. And it was not only a close study of the political problems and customs of his day, but also an attempt to lay down rules as to how people should be governed. So the important factor or important issue questioned or considered in this book is how people should be governed. What kind of government should people have? So this becomes the important question which Machiavelli addresses in his book, The Prince. Machiavelli emancipated politics from theology and moral philosophy. So the greatest contribution of Machiavelli is he emancipated or kind of separated politics from religion. Till this time, there is a tendency to infuse or bring religion into politics and mix it up. So he segregates or separates politics from religion. And the practices which he formulated were very widely used by politicians and princes who were building up new nation states for 15th and 16th century. So his greatest contribution is that whatever theories and ideas which he gives in his book, The Prince, gets used or is taken up by princes who then lay the foundations of a very strong nation state by the 15th and 16th century. Europe came into their own again in fascist Italy in the 20th century. So these ideas which Machiavelli gives in his book The Prince is taken up by the great rulers of his time, and later on it re-emerges or comes back in the fascist Italy under Mussolini in the 20th century. So there are some questions from this part also. Explain the political ideas of Machiavelli. So we already saw the importance which is given to the question of how people should be governed. And the emancipation of politics from religion and moral philosophy. That becomes important. And he also supports a strong empire with a absolute king as its head, who could then take decisions on the basis of what is good for the people. So he also supports a strong empire with an absolute ruler at its head. And we see describe the contribution of humanist writers to literature. So we have already seen a set of humanist writers like Petrarch, Dante, Machiavelli, and Neoplatonists. So you have to mention all these names. These are all be considered as humanist writers who in some way or the other is giving their thoughts on what kind of a political structure should the nation have, and what role should a monarch play, and how they are getting inspired by the ancient Greek and the Roman civilization, and how they take interest in knowing more about the civilization by studying ancient Greek and literature. So all these points are to be brought in. It's an essay type question, so you'll have to go into details of the contributions of each of the scholars to the tradition of humanism. And the other question is, what were the features of humanistic thought? So here we see that a renewed interest in the study of ancient or classical literature is called humanism. So here we see that the features are the learning of ancient Greece and Latin, and studying closely the works of philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates happens in this time period. And there is a comparison of the ancient time with the contemporary Europe, that is the 14th century Europe. And here there is an effort to go back to the pre-Christian world. So pre-Christian world and its specific features, how it was different, and how they understand that the life which they are now in, that is in medieval Europe, the control of church is stopping people from realizing their own potentials and living life to its fullest. So there emerges a critique of the church, or a questioning of the authority of the church, which ultimately helps human beings rediscover themselves and the world. So this become the important features of humanistic thought in 14th century Europe. So now, till now, we have centered around Italy, because it is in Italy that all the famous cities are coming up, and which become important places of learning. From now, we will shift our attention to humanist thinkers in other countries of Europe other than Italy. So in France, they produced two great writers, two true Renaissance figures, to match the achievements in the literary art of great scholar Erasmus. They were Francois Rebellius and Michael Montaigne. So to match the achievements of the great literary scholar Erasmus, there emerged two important figures in France who were Francois Rabelais and Michael Montaigne. So Rabelais drew his great literary portraits of two giants, Gargantua and Pantagruel, who did what they wanted. So for this scholar Rabelais, he had two important figures in his writings. These names are a bit difficult to pronounce and to remember, but then you just have to remember that these are two characteristics which are used by the scholar Rabelais, who was a scholar, humanist scholar from France. And the importance of these characters are that they do what they wished or what they wanted. What these two giants wanted most was to subject conventions to mockery and hilarity. So what they wanted was conventions, that is norms or the traditions. That is what has been followed from a long time in a society. So these characters mock or make fun of these traditions which they feel are meaningless. There is no such a ridicule of the church, its scholasticism, its monkish practices, its dogmas, its prohibitions, and its ethics as in the work of Rabelais. So it is important to see that there is no such ridicule of church and its dogmas that is present in the work of Rabelais. So what Rabelais does is he mocks or he makes fun of all the conventions, and he ridicules or insults church for controlling man and his thinking for such long time. So he fearlessly questions the church. So this questioning of the of authority of church becomes the most important feature of the writings of Francois Rabelais. And he satirized in a lusty and exuberant style the medieval ideas and institutions that persisted in France in his own days. So he is making fun, and his works are a satire. Satire is, in a funny way, making fun of institutions which control and which keep man as its slave. So this writings of Rabelais is in a way a satire which mocks and makes fun of the dogmas of the church and its control. Another important scholar in France is Michael Montaigne. So for Montaigne, in his essays, that is his written pieces, he reveals a wonderfully subtle mind which is also a critical cast. So for him, human mind is subtle, that is, it knows and it is full of knowledge, and it is very sensitive, and it has a critical capacity, that is, to question what is wrong. He preached that no truths were final and that beliefs and customs are relative to time and space. So here he too is questioning the dominant notion, and he says no truth is final. Whatever we know today as truth, we cannot say that 100 years later that will remain truth. Maybe other discoveries and inventions will prove that those were wrong. So this is what Montaigne suggests. And he says the beliefs and customs are relative to time and space. So whatever customs and beliefs you practice, it will also keep changing according to time. He advised that men should drop their quarrels over the road to glory or salvation and to begin to enjoy the life to the fullest, exercising restraint only against overindulgence. So another important suggestion which he gives in his text is man should stop arguing about what the afterlife is or what life after death is. Instead, they should learn to live the life to its fullest. And the restraint or control should only be kept when you are overindulging in something, because that is not anyway good for health. But otherwise, you should not stop yourself from enjoying your life. And in his essay on the education of children, he attacked the common opinion that learning was only memorizing. So till then, the popular understanding is when you learn something, you just learn it by heart or memorize it without thinking on it. He questioned that idea and said that when you learn something, you are expected to understand and analyze it instead of just learning it by heart or memorizing it. He held that education was not complete until the student became polished, refined, courteous, and eager to learn the realities of life and nature. So a complete education for Montaigne was something which made the student more refined, courteous, and eager to learn the realities of life and nature. So these are the two important scholars of France. Now we come to Spain and the developments there. So in Spain, Cervantes wrote his famous book Don Quixote. Its purpose was to ridicule the old system of knighthood. So here also ridiculing or making fun of the old system remains the same, and chivalry, which had by this time outlived its usefulness. So Cervantes is ridiculing the knights and the old system of chivalry, which was now become meaningless. And in England, we see that Renaissance spirit appeared quite early in the writings of Geoffrey Chaucer. So, Geoffrey Chaucer, who lived between 1344 and 1400, that is the 14th century, had traces of the Renaissance thought in his writing. And his masterpiece was the Canterbury Tales. His most famous work was titled The Canterbury Tales, which reflects the Renaissance spirit because these stories deal with the human situations, with love, greed, honor, and ambitions and horrors of men and women. So, unlike the focus on God and his plans, the Canterbury Tales talks about human situation and the conditions which human beings find himself or herself in. That is, the feelings of love, greed, honor, ambitions, and horrors. So that makes it a work of humanistic tradition. So now we look at the Oxford reformers. So after Chaucer, literary artists in England began to express mounting confidence in man, his power to interpret both himself and nature. So we already saw that it's Geoffrey Chaucer and his famous work, The Tales of Canterbury or the Canterbury Tales, puts man in the center and looks or analyzes closely his emotions and feelings. So this gave the artists of England a confidence to interpret both man and the nature which he was in. In the 15th century, a number of English scholars went to Italy in order to study medicine and new learning. So by 15th century, important developments taking place is that English scholars are going to Italy in order to study medicine and take interest in this Renaissance movement. On their return, gradually they gathered at the University of Oxford an enthusiastic group of English humanists known as Oxford reformers. So this group of people or scholars who went to England, went to Italy to learn medicine and take interest in this new learning, come back and they come together in the Oxford University, a great place of learning. And as a result of their efforts, Oxford became renowned for the classical studies. So, taking inspiration from the scholars of Italy, in England, we see that the Oxford University emerges as a center of classical studies by the 15th century. The most famous scholars of Oxford who added to the fame of the Renaissance movement were John Colet, Thomas More, and Erasmus. So in England, these were some of the important scholars who were taking interest in this Renaissance movement. So Cambridge also took, so another university is University of Cambridge, also took up the study of classical learning. So similar to Oxford, Cambridge is also taking up the study of classical learning. The most famous Renaissance scholars of Cambridge were Richard Croke, Thomas Smith, Gassa, and Check. But none of these scholars achieved such eminence as the Oxford scholars. So, but compared to the Cambridge scholars, it was Oxford scholars who were more well known and famous. And England produced her humanists as well. So Thomas More wrote his famous book Utopia, in which he criticized the ways of Europe of the 16th century. So Thomas More is one of the important scholars of Renaissance and who takes interest in the classical studies in England, and his work, the Utopia, criticizes ways of Europe of the 16th century. And he also gives the pictures of an imaginary world in which there is no poverty, no oppression of man by another man, no disease, no war, and men work 6 hours a day, hold goods in common, devote their leisures to endless intellectual pursuits that make them tolerant, wise, brave, and just. So, in his book, he talks about this imagined world where there is no oppression or no negativity, and all the creeds that accepted God's existence and immortality of soul are welcome to the state. Ever since then, men have applied the term utopia to idealistic plans for social improvement. So, this term utopia uh, conveyed the meaning or referred to the state of mind where people were self-sufficient or did not lack anything, and it was a state where there was no war, no disease, no men fought with another men, no oppression, and no poverty. So, because of this state as something which is so difficult to arrive at, people called it something which is unachievable, or the term utopia came to refer to a state of idealistic plans, that is something which can never be achieved in real life, but it will always remain an ideal plan or a desire for social improvement. So this term utopia thus came to be known as a particular state of ideal being which was very difficult to achieve in real sense. Then we come to the developments in theatre. So till now, the focus was on intellectual activities and literary traditions of the classical period, and the humanists who took interest in learning ancient Greek and Latin to study those works and to compare their lives with those classical period and bring the required changes to their lives and the social structure. So when it comes to theatre, we see that the English theatre greatly helped in the expression of humanist sentiments. So whatever the beliefs and ideologies or ideas of the humanists were, it got reflected in the theatre or in drama and other such artistic interventions. And it served as a link between intellectuals and mass of people. So the important thing about theatre is that whatever ideas the humanists were trying to popularize, they could take it to the common people, because most of the common people or a major part were illiterate. They did not have access to written material, or they did not had knowledge of writing and reading. So the theatre and such arts help the intellectuals or the scholars take their ideas to the common people. The theatre attracted some of the versatile pens in England. Of these, the most versatile was William Shakespeare. And the most versatile or well known in the theatre in England was William Shakespeare. And his plays can be divided into three categories, that is histories, comedies, and tragedies. So the plays which he had written and directed could be divided into histories, comedies, and tragedies, depending on the theme of those plays. The main theme of his historical plays were the idea of kingship. So whatever is related to king and his power became the main theme. And then it also included the sins of rebelling against the kings. So if somebody dared to rebel or question the king's authority, what happened to that person, how sinful that was, or how wrong such affairs were, and the problems when a king misgoverns. And his theatre activities also had plays which talked about the problems which arise or which came into being when a king did not carry out his role as he was supposed to do. So in his comedies as well as tragedies, Shakespeare was concerned with human problems and human greatness. So here again, as the humanists had wanted, the focus remains human problems and human greatness. So this is the major shift that is happening with humanists and the Renaissance, that man gets rediscovered and the world is also getting rediscovered by bringing man into the focus. So we have already seen the name of Erasmus, an important scholar and humanist in England. So we see the Dutch scholar Erasmus is regarded as the greatest of all humanists. So this is one of the most famous names among the humanists, that is Erasmus. So though he was born in Holland, he grew up, he became a man with many countries, having contacts in Germany, England and Italy. So although he was a Dutch person, he had contacts and he was having active relations with people in Germany, England and Italy. And in his book, In Praise of Folly, this is the title of his book, he lashes out at all the evils and vices of his time. So Erasmus questions the problems of the time in which he lived in. And he taught the Europeans to laugh at and run away from the ignorant old scholars. So along with this, he gave an encouragement to the Europeans to be critical, that is, to question old knowledge. That is what was getting a dominant position, and to question old scholars and use your own mind to understand and analyze the problems of the present. And he singles out for attack princes who love war, scholars who waste time over trivial problems, and people who were superstitious. It is rightly said that the wit of Erasmus was more dangerous than anger of Luther. So Luther is Martin Luther, who was responsible for the Reformation in Europe and the Catholic Church. So this Protestant movement, which is led by Martin Luther in the 16th century. So that's why we refer to Luther here. So there is a comparison between wit or the satire or the mocking of the old traditions by Erasmus is compared to the anger of Luther. And it is said that the wit of Erasmus is more dangerous than the anger of Luther, because in a very funny way, Erasmus could ridicule the teachings of the church and the old structure. This ridicule of monks and their opinions naturally produced the contempt for the established church. So as a result, the church was subjected to critical questioning. War, science and hate in any form also met with the sting of his criticism. So he also criticized the princes who were more interested in war, because it was he found it a waste of resources. And superstitious practices were also questioned by Erasmus in his writing. And Erasmus produced the first Renaissance translation of the New Testament from original Greek sources and made a great contribution in exposing the errors of Bible in use. So here Erasmus made efforts to translate the New Testament of Bible from the Greek language, and in certain ways he exposed the errors in Bible, and he counter-checked it, and he exposed the major errors which were there in Bible in this period. All his life, the great scholar, as he was called, carried on fight against ignorance. So the major enemies which Erasmus had was ignorance, or people's inability to question superstitions, stupidity and vice. He considered all these characters as his enemies. And he died in 1526 and left behind him a valuable foundation on which late scholars and thinkers were able to build program of reform. So the works of Erasmus inspired a large section of people to be critical of their times and to live the life to its fullest.